Our first reading this morning comes from a book that we've used before. It's called Black Liturgies, Prayers, Poems, and Meditations for Staying Human by Cole Arthur Riley. If you're on Instagram, I encourage you to follow Black Liturgies. It's a really great social media post. And the letter that I'm going to read you is to the ones who don't float. I'm not going to say it's too long. I'm going to say it's just the right length. A few years ago, a friend told me I tend to dislike happy people. I objected at first, but when I took account of my closest friends, it seemed that each of them, in their own way, possessed a sort of solemnity. None, I would say, are light-hearted in nature, and while we laugh together, it would be stranger for our conversation to lack gravity than humor. So when I met Esther, who giggles like SpongeBob and walks like she's skating, I knew I mustn't retreat. We met through a mutual friend. The first time we had dinner, she laughed at her own jokes like she was watching stand-up. She didn't wait for me to laugh first, like some. She was present to herself in that way. And I sat there and watched as the goofiest things began to leak out of me in her presence. It didn't feel like she was giving me permission so much as she had unlocked a part of me. I didn't have to walk through a door. I didn't have to work for it. Levity came to me, a fraction of hers, but there nonetheless. When we became roommates, I anticipated seeing her mask slip, that her happiness would be revealed as a charade. I wouldn't have blamed her for this. I already loved her far too deeply by then. But I found quite the opposite occurred. The more I got to know her, the more real happiness her happiness became to me. She claps for herself after parallel parking, even when we land miles from the curb. She cooks feast with rotten produce, believing things once good are always worth trying to revive. The thing about Esther, the thing that is not immediately apparent to those who encounter her, is that she does possess a profound sorrow. She has experienced too much grief for one lifetime. I wonder if she would even call herself happy. But Esther taught me what it means to be a person of deep pain without letting it eclipse every part of oneself. She contains the miracle of both joy and happiness, joy being a quality of one's interior life, and happiness being the courage to let exterior circumstances still raise one's spirit. Perhaps I didn't like happy people because I thought joy could only have one face and it would never be my own. I didn't become Esther. I'm still not giggly and I don't get excited over the little things. Still, in the presence of her joy, I became more myself, at peace, solid, a little lighter, silly in strange ways, more aware that no day is only ever tragedy. Zadie Smith wrote, "You are never stronger than when you land on the other side of despair." I think joy gets us there, and when we wander, it calls us back home before nightfall. I'm writing to let you know that you are more than your pain, that you can feel deeply without being consumed. For you, I want laughter. And if you cannot locate your laughter, may you find some dispensation of comfort. I need you to survive this terrible, beautiful place. Sorrow alone will starve you. Your joy doesn't need to look like mine, but what is tethering you to the beautiful? You've seen the fires burning, stared down the dragon's gaping mouth. Tell me, what is keeping you here? Steadying your breath in weary places? This resistance, this entrance to a world of our own remaking, if you're suspended in the tension, who says you can't make music? Our scripture reading this morning is from Psalm 29. Give glory to Yahweh, you heavenly court. Give Yahweh glory and strength. Give forth the glory that God's name deserves, and worship Yahweh in the splendor of holiness. The voice of Yahweh resounds over the waters. The God of glory thunders over the raging seas. God's voice is powerful. God's voice is full of majesty. The voice of Yahweh snaps the cedars, shatters the cedars of Lebanon. It makes Lebanon skip like a calf and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of Yahweh strikes with bolts of lightning. The voice of Yahweh shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of God twists the oaks and strips the forest bare. And in God's temple, all cry glory. Yahweh sits in judgment over the flood. Yahweh is its ruler forever. Give strength to your people, Yahweh. Bless your people with peace. Storm chasing is broadly defined as the deliberate pursuit of any severe weather phenomenon, regardless of motive, but most commonly for curiosity, adventure, scientific investigation, or for media coverage. From one perspective, it may seem that the poet who composed Psalm 29 was an ancient version of what we today might call a storm chaser. After all, the heart of Psalm 29, verses 3 to 9, is an enthusiastic and extended report of a powerful thunderstorm that apparently formed over the Mediterranean Sea and that proceeded to crash over the coast of Palestine and to make its way inland. The storm damage is in full view in verse 5 and 9. It was the result of high winds that we hear about in verses 6 and 8 that were accompanied by sharp lightning in verse 7 and the constant rumble of thunder, which is what is meant by the voice of Yahweh. The image of God showing up in the midst of a storm is one that resonates for many of us. It reminds us of the fact that joy and sadness are not incompatible, that they often can live together in the very same moment. Life can be excruciatingly hard and simultaneously joyful. Many of us have learned that the hard way, and if you have yet to learn that particular lesson, I'm sorry to report that you too will. The personal story that makes me know that joy and sorrow are strange bedfellows took place at the end of my mother-in-law's life. No one has ever loved ice cream more than Lori Elliott Tennant. She actually loved all dairy products and was known to eat cereal with half and half on purpose, not because she ran out of milk. Her favorite way to eat ice cream was to pour amaretto, almond-flavored liqueur, over it. Aaron's already laughing. So when she was confined to a hospital bed on hospice at home, everyone would visit her in her bedroom and bring little treats that they thought she'd like. Her youngest son brought her some amaretto to pour over ice cream. But by then, things were bad enough that she could not really manage to swallow even ice cream. But she let us know through nonverbal communication that we should not give up on this dream altogether. With a few grunts, raised eyebrows, and gestures, we knew with certainty what she wanted from us, for us to shovel amaretto straight from a spoon right into her mouth. We have never laughed so hard, ever. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But no one can tell us that God doesn't show up in the midst of the storms of life and bless you with laughter, strength, and peace. Rabbi Ari Fanari shared a reflection about joy, saying, joy in Hebrew, simcha, is not plain old happiness, which, don't get me wrong, is a great thing all by itself. We have other words in Judaism for happiness, the rabbi says. A long list of them, in fact, appears in the traditional blessing recited at weddings. Gile, Rina, Ditza, Hedva, gladness, jubilation, cheer, delight. But simcha is different. Simcha is a shared experience of the sacred. It is a well we dip into, draw from, and create together. Joy might be something we can cultivate, but even more so, it is something that cultivates us if we let it. Angela Williams-Gorel is the author of a book called The Gravity of Joy, a story of being lost and found. Her book seeks to consider joy as a counteragent to America's crisis of despair. But she says we can't make joy like spaghetti. There is no recipe for it. She had been studying the theology of joy and was about to teach a new course at Yale University about joy called Life Worth Living. when the crisis of despair crashed into her own life. 8 months into working on the project, one of her family members died by suicide. In a moment, her life changed forever, and as a pastor, she was called upon by her family to do the funeral. A week and a half later, she gets back to Connecticut and realizes she didn't know how they would recover from this as a family. She knew it would be a really difficult road to healing for them. And then suddenly she gets another urgent text from her younger sister saying, "You need to call me right away." When she calls, she finds out that her nephew Mason had died very suddenly at age 22 from a previously unknown heart condition. She called her oldest sister, his mother, and suddenly she's traveling back out of town for another funeral. After the funeral, she gets back home to Connecticut, and 2 days after Mason's funeral, she finds out that her father's in the ER fighting for his life. She recalls not being able to comprehend all that was happening and saying, "There is no way that my father is dying this week after all of these other losses. This cannot happen to us." It's her first day teaching at Yale University, a class called Life Worth Living, and she goes into survival mode. She closes her heart to what is actually happening and tries to compartmentalize like we often do. She tells her students, "If I'm not in the next class, it's because my dad's not doing well." And the next morning, she gets the news from her dad's nurse that if you want to see your dad alive, you have to come today. So she takes 3 planes and a rental car, begging God to let her see her dad alive, and her dad dies that night. But not before she got to spend 5 beautiful hours of sacred holy ground with him as he transitioned from this life to the next. So 8 months into the Joy Project, in a matter of 4 weeks, she had lost 3 beloved people. She got back home to Connecticut and thought, study joy? Unthinkable. We'll return back to Angela's story in a bit. Someone else who points us towards the commingling, the inseparability of joy and sorrow is Khalil Gibran, a Lebanese writer, poet, and visual artist. He was also considered a philosopher, but he rejected that title for himself. He is best known as the author of The Prophet, one of the best-selling books of all times. Here's what Gibran had to say on this topic. "A woman said, 'Speak to us of joy and sorrow.' And he answered, 'Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the selfsame well from which your laughter arises was oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper the sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain.'" How does all the suffering relate to joy? Yale theologian Miroslav Volf talks about being at a funeral and thinking of this person that has departed and experiencing profound sadness and grief, but also the experience that exactly what we miss about them also makes us rejoice. There is even a coalition of joy and deep sorrow. We are celebrating something even as we grieve. In grieving something, we celebrate and rejoice. At one and the same time, I can both rejoice and be sad. There are traditions, especially Jewish traditions, of nurturing sadness as accompanying every joy. There is something untrue about giving oneself completely to joy, while one realizes that there are so many things in the world for which we should be grieving. How can you rejoice when there's so much suffering? But it's possible that even in every joy that you pay homage to the brokenness so that you don't obliviously forget about the sorrow. When you are joyous, look deep into your heart and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. When you are sorrowful, look again in your heart and you shall see, in truth, you are weeping for that which has been your delight. In Jewish practice, you finish building a house, but you leave something undone as a reminder that the world isn't as it ought to be. You can imagine how a family or an individual might use imagination to institute this concept and to customize rituals and spiritual practices. It's like when we say grace and give thanks for our food and mention those who are hungry and going without so that we are not oblivious as we try to live in the complexity of the good and evil that surrounds us. While there is no recipe for joy, there are some gateways to it. You have to look and be ready for it. Hope is the anticipation of joy. Declare your hope as a gateway to joy. The power of gratitude is another way. If we never compare ourselves to anyone else, but instead see everything as a gift, we'll experience gratitude that leads to joy. Faithful presence with others is another gateway to joy. That's why you always hear stories about people trying to be of service to others, and they end up finding that those people that they were trying to help actually ministered to them instead. That's what happened to Angela from the beginning of my sermon. After that, those triple losses that she experienced in her family, she says that what healed her was teaching a Bible study in prison. The women who were incarcerated helped heal her broken heart. Music can be another gateway to joy. That's why we sing together in church. Ross Gay would say that training yourself to notice small delights is a gateway to inciting joy. In today's sermon, we learned that our sorrow can indeed also serve as a gateway to joy. I wish I could hear from each of you about the things that transport you to your own personal joy portal. Getting back to Cole Arthur Riley from our first reading for a full circle moment, your joy doesn't need to look like mine, but what is tethering you to the beautiful? You've seen the fires burning, stared down the dragon's gaping mouth. Tell me, what is keeping you here, steadying your breath in weary places? This resistance, this entrance to a world of our own remaking, if you're suspended in the tension, who says we can't make music? This is the good news of God. Amen.